a recommendation to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All right, you always count on Beth. We have a second? Second. All in favor of approving the minutes from the first meeting? Aye.
Aye.
So I believe we have a unanimous approval of that. Next item is public comments. And so I'll read the speech Jessica typically reads. To save her voice for later on this evening. So this is the time to comment on any non-agenda matter falling within the scope of the IWRP Public Advisory Committee. There will also be time in conjunction with each agenda item for public comment relating to that item, but you may only speak once per topic. Please note the committee cannot take any action on any item which doesn't appear on the agenda. All persons addressing the committee shall speak in a civil and courteous manner, and members of the audience shall be respectful of others. Please state your name and your place of residence in an audible tone of voice for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. General public comments to the committee can be found on Engage Bozeman. Looking around the room, I do not see anybody who appears to be a member of the public. So I believe we can continue on with new business. So with that, I'll invite Jessica Alstrom from the city to start section 1 of 6 sections tonight. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Again, we appreciate your time. I know you could be with your families at home, so thank you very much. I might just actually quickly go back to the agenda, partly because I didn't hit record yet and because we didn't pull up this slide. So we're going to start off with our community engagement update. I'm going to touch on fundamentals, like super high level information on Montana water law. And then we'll talk a little bit about Bozeman's water supply and demands. And then I'll be introducing our conservation plan and our drought plan. And then from there, we'll kind of shift gears back into integrated water resource plan stuff and talk about screening criteria that we'll be using to evaluate on supply alternatives going forward. With that, okay, so community engagement update. So this will be something we do at every meeting just to update you all on what we've done in the community to engage folks on this effort and what we're hearing from them. So far, or since the last meeting, we participated in 3 public events. We had a table at Story Under the Stars, Catapalooza, and then the last farmers market. And what we heard from folks that engaged in conversation about this was concerns about the cost of Canyon Ferry. So Canyon Ferry and using water from that, piping it down to Bozeman was an alternative to the last integrated plan. And a feasibility analysis was done in January of 24 and presented to our commission on that. And so folks that were in the know on that have expressed concerns about the cost of that alternative. We also heard suggestions to import water from the Yellowstone. The Yellowstone is not in a closed basin like we are, so it's a lot easier to get water from there. And then we also heard suggestions to capture and store spring runoff in some of the supply alternatives. And then all of this will have a little more context once we go through those, which we'll start doing next month. And we can, point out, how some of these things could relate to different alternatives. We also heard support for conservation. And then this image up here on the screen is just kind of an activity we're trying to pull folks in to engage with us with. And so basically we have a fishbowl and folks can grab a ticket to submit kind of the water related matter that's a top priority for them. And so far water quality and drought resilience are about neck and neck with folks that are doing that, followed by the cost of water and lastly aging infrastructure. And we have not received any concerns or comments on note cards as part of this yet. All right, well, big shifting gears to talk about water law. So I'm going to keep this high level, but I think this is an important kind of foundation to have as you're thinking about these alternatives. So Montana waters, right, in all their forms belong to the state. So we can own a water right to use that water, but we do not own that water. Montana water law is guided by the prior appropriation doctrine. That's across the West, so that is not unique to Montana. And basically that states that it's a concept of first in time, first in right. So water rights are ranked in priority, according to when the use of that water first began. I think we touched on this a little bit last time, but the concept being that if I'm, downstream of an upstream user, but I have a more senior right, I can make a call on that upstream user to require that they curtail their use so that I can use my full water right. So that's the concept. It doesn't have anything to do with where your water use is. It's just basically the priority date associated with that. The state requires that all water be reasonable and beneficial, all water use. It can't be wasted. And all water rights have a beneficial use associated with them. So examples include irrigation, municipal use, flood control. Some water rights have multiple beneficial uses. So we're often going to be talking about municipal rights, but we'll also be talking about maybe agricultural rights, how we could maybe utilize those and transfer those to a municipal right and things like that. So it's just important to keep in mind that that beneficial use is important from a water rights standpoint. And then reasonable use is also something, we won't really get into that, but it is something that the state addresses. So I already mentioned this, but Bozeman is located in a closed basin. So that basically means all of our surface water rights have already been appropriated. The map on the screen is showing the DNRC's administrative basins, and that's basically how they manage water rights, and those administrative basins are what's associated with closures. New groundwater rights can be issued, but they're subject to mitigation requirements because groundwater and surface water are connected. So those mitigation requirements make groundwater development challenging, even though our basin is open to groundwater development. All water rights that go through a change in ownership are subject to a review process by the state. And then depending on what the change includes, the total volume of water associated with that water right may change. So one example would be if the city wanted to purchase an agricultural water right, that water right likely has a time of use of a few months of the year during the growing season. And if we wanted to convert that to a municipal water right, where it be used all year long, it would probably take a haircut or multiple haircuts and be a lower volume. So that's just kind of like the concept of that change process and how that can impact a water right. I just included the screen grab from the state's website just to show all of the different elements of a water right. And I guess if there's anything to take away from this, is that there are a lot of factors involved in this, and it makes it really complicated. All of these things, if the water right goes through a change process, are looked at and evaluated and ultimately could change. And so it's a really complicated thing, and it takes a long time to do, but ultimately throughout this process, as we talk about alternatives, there will likely be discussion about water right changes. So I just wanted to provide kind of a primer on what that looks like. All right, with that, I will shift into talking about Bozeman's water supply and use trends. So Bozeman currently gets its water from three main sources. We get about 40% of our supply from Bozeman Creek, 40% from Highlight Creek and Reservoir, and then 20% from Lyman Spring, which is in the Bridgers. If you're looking at the M, the drainage, like just to the north of that, is where Lyman Spring is. And that was the city's original water supply source. A few things to note with our water supplies. We have amazing water quality, as you all probably know, because of where we're located within our watershed. But we also have some issues with resiliency because of that same thing. So we're at the headwaters, and we rely entirely on snowpack for our water supply. We also have really limited storage. So we do use water out of Highlight Reservoir to support irrigation demands in the summertime. But beyond that, we rely on what's flowing in the creek at any given time. And so that's just something to keep in mind too, as we talk about alternatives, just kind of recognizing what our challenges are and maybe how to increase resiliency as we look ahead through this 50-year time frame. And as we go along, if you have questions, please just chime in. To zoom out a little bit, just to touch on water use in the Gallatin Valley, just to give you all some context. In terms of users in the Gallatin Valley, there are municipalities, agricultural producers, county, water and sewer districts, and private wells. The total surface water rights in our basin equal 15,000 cubic feet per second. For context, the portion of total surface water rights consumed by the city is 19 cubic feet per second, right? So a very, very small portion of all the water available. So while, right, we're talking about this big community and all the water we use, I just wanted to kind of paint the picture of how that falls into the whole valley, because there's a lot of other users as well. So talking about the city, we often look at demands and trends through the lens of our customer classes. So we have different customer classes that pay different rates for water and sewer based on the cost of service to provide, water and sewer to those customers. So this is a snapshot of our water demand by customer class from last year. And you can see that single family homes use about 35% of the city's water, followed by multifamily, which is 29%, and then commercial at 23%. MSU is about 9%, and then the other two are pretty small categories. This just gives you an idea of how water is used in the city. And then looking at that throughout the year. So this graph is showing our average monthly water use by customer class. We have million gallons on the y-axis and then the year on the x. And you can see that there's those long green lines in the middle. So that represents single family water use driven up by irrigation. You can see that commercial and multifamily also increased a little bit, but not nearly as much. And that's for a couple reasons. One is that every single family home tends to have a lawn associated with it. And so just by, proportion of area, single family homes and properties use a lot of water in the summer. But also, there is a state policy that allows for the drilling of what are called exempt wells. And so those exempt wells can be used with limitations, but to irrigate commercial and like open space and different things like that. So bigger green space areas associated with larger development projects. Those are often utilized by the commercial and multifamily customer class. And that's why you're not seeing that big spike, because this is just looking at our city water supplies.
That's great.
Yeah.
But on this chart and the last chart for multifamily, is that per unit or per like apartment complex?
Oh, good question. So the last one, that's, if you look at the total city demand over like a whole year,
Yeah.
23% of that whole demand is used on our multifamily customers.
Got it.
Yeah. And then the next chart or graph is looking at the same thing. The whole is an average of a few years, but the whole year.
Got it.
Yep.
Is that fairly typical? These kind of numbers for water use in other communities?
Yeah, I would say so. You think about Bozeman, we don't have like a big industrial community, even our commercial is pretty small. So I would say it's pretty typical. And certainly in terms of the demand trends and how they increase in the summer, that's very typical. Yeah. Even in our short growing season, it just jumps up a lot. And it says here nearly 50% of annual residential water use, meaning that single family customer class, goes into lawns and landscapes. I just ran the numbers, it was a little bit less, it's like in the low to mid 40s, but that can fluctuate a lot by the year too, so. Some of the existing or future trends I want to mention just for the group to keep in mind. One is that we had done an analysis in 2017 to look at, we basically looked at all single households based on their year built to identify basically if older homes or newer homes were using more or less water outdoors. And basically what we found is that new single family homes were using more water on their landscapes despite being on lots that were smaller. So I believe it was they were using over twice as much water outdoors, but the lots were 20% smaller. And so with that, we made a few decisions. We revised our rate structure to have what's called an inclining block rate. So the more, when you move from one tier to the next, you pay more per gallon to send a price signal. It's also a more equitable rate structure as well. And then we, I guess maybe a bigger project was to basically adopt a water efficient landscape ordinance to require new development to have less turf grass, more efficient irrigation. And so that was last year. We haven't seen numbers from that yet, but we're optimistic that that's really gonna move the needle. The next note here is that more of those large developments that use those exempt wells are likely to tie into the city system in the future due to changes at the state level and how they are allowing the use of exempt wells. And so that's just something we're keeping in mind as we look at these trends, knowing that those shorter blue and purple bars, right, might get a little bit taller. And then lastly, climate models predict that we're gonna have longer, higher, drier summers. And that, of course, leads to thirstier landscapes. And so as we look at policies, as we look at projects, we're keeping that in mind as well. So in terms of Bozeman's water use compared to other Montana communities, so one really good metric we use to look at our efficiency is gallons per capita day, or GPCD. That's a really helpful metric to look at long-term. 1 year to the next, not so much, but in looking at those trends, we're finding that Bozeman lands at around 114 gallons per person per day. When compared to other large communities in Montana, that average is at 163. And even compared to other kind of comparable communities across the West, we're doing pretty good. So Bozeman is really kind of leading the charge, certainly at the state level in terms of efficiency. But we have a lot of work to do, especially in face of climate change and some of those other things that we're anticipating. So shifting gears a little bit to talk about our supply. So we just talked about demand, how water is used, how much water do we have though, right? So what this is showing you is our legal water rights and a reliable supply. So as this project continues, you're going to hear reliable supply probably quite often. So what we mean when we talk about reliable supply is basically the amount of water that we can rely upon from our current supplies that we just talked about in like a pretty significant drought year, like a 1 in 50 year drought. It also accounts for some elements of our water rights to ensure that we would have those for the ones that are more junior in priority, right? So we like to plan around our reliable supply just to have that buffer and that cushion. But we have more water on paper, and so far, like this year, we're realizing our full legal water rights of over 16,000 acre feet. Just to give context of how much of that we use in a normal year, like this year, we are using 43% of our legal water rights as a community. So we have room to grow. When you look at that on a reliable supply, we're using about 60%. The city has a pretty awesome tool that allows us to track water that has been allocated to new development. So as projects go through the development process, they have to meet our water adequacy requirements. And basically we can track that so that as we're approving projects, we're kind of earmarking water for those before they're built. And so even when we look at approved projects that have yet to exert a demand on our system, we're using about 49% of our legal supply and 68% of our reliable supply. Any questions on that? All right. So just to kind of sum up that section of the presentation, this is just looking at our total water production as a city against our population. And so you can hopefully see the trend lines. That lighter blue trend line is showing our total production, or how much water we produce and send to town. And you can see that it is increasing in the last 20 years, but not a whole lot, especially compared to the population growth, right? So these are also trends that we look at to just see how we're doing. And with that, I'm going to shift gears and talk about our conservation and drought plan. So you all have a lot of paper in front of you. So you have the printed copy of the Integrated Water Resource Plan with IWRP and a copy of the conservation plan as well. So this conservation plan was adopted in 2023 and it really serves as a roadmap for program growth through 2040. And it also helps quantify achievable savings to inform projects just like this, right? If we have an understanding of how much water we can save through conservation, we can better plan what future supplies we need. So the plan has 3 different programs outlined in it. Program A is our existing measures, what we're doing today. Program B is those in addition to some recommended measures that our city commission approved. And then program C was everything that was modeled. The reason that we run all these different measures in programs is because we want to see what a suite of measures will save to the extent that some of those measures may overlap, because we don't want to double count savings. So for example, a simple example would be a toilet rebate program and requiring efficient toilets for new development, right? We want to double count that. So that's kind of why it's all structured that way. Some of the considerations in how these programs or suites of measures were put together include definitely a benefit cost ratio, stakeholder input, a balance of having voluntary measures as well as regulatory measures, equitability among all of our customer classes, and then customer demographics. And all of those programs penciled out. This benefit cost ratio, basically anything exceeding 1 means it pencils out. And so program B had a benefit cost ratio of 3.4, which is really great. So the existing program measures outlined in that plan includes, this is basically what we're doing today, include distribution system auditing. So we check the leakage of our distribution system through audits and then, improve practices to lower that leakage rate. Some leakage is inherent in any system. Just for context, so like a system that has a 10% leakage rate is like the best there is. So some have really high numbers. We're around 15, a little less. So we also have what are called smart meters. So accompanied by a customer water use portal so that our customers can access their water use, see hourly usage, get leak alerts, right, and really understand what they're using to help them save water and use it more wisely. We have projects to improve our city facility irrigation systems. We also provide customer water use assessments to help folks reduce their outdoor water use. We're also working with MSU to audit their systems and processes, and we found a lot of good savings there too. So that's been a cool project. We do a number of things with public education. We have drought tolerant demonstration gardens to help folks kind of see what these alternative landscapes can look like. Another big thing that we've been focusing on in recent years is working with our irrigation and landscape contractor community to ensure that they have the resources, training they need to install efficient systems and landscapes. We also give away efficient fixtures like shower heads and things like that. We have 10 different rebate programs, six outdoor programs and 4 indoor rebate programs. And then that water efficient landscape ordinance that I mentioned as well. So that's sort of everything we've done so far and are going to continue to do. There were a handful of other measures that were recommended for implementation in the plan. But as part of your work on this IWRP, you definitely have an opportunity to guide what we do for conservation. I know that we talk so much about supply and you're going to talk more and more about supply development. But we want to hear from you on how far we should take conservation, what measures we should or shouldn't pursue. And so while these are outlined for recommendation, this is not set in stone. So just know that. And then, as we go through this, if you need any more information, let me know. But some of the things recommended include a low income leak repair assistance program, a commercial high efficiency clothes washer rebate program, an impact fee credit for development projects going through our plan review process, requiring irrigation designers and installers to have certification that shows that they, can do efficient work. And then lastly is a mandatory water efficiency offset. And so I'll talk about that one here for a minute. So the city has this water adequacy code that basically requires that any new project going through the development process offset their water demand. And so there are a few different ways in which you could do that. One is by transferring water rights to the city. That does not happen often, though that's our preferred approach. One is by paying a cash in lieu fee, and so that we can then, right, go acquire the supplies to support the development. And then lastly is to basically implement efficiency projects to lower the demand of the project. And that's what this one's getting at. And so well, basically right now you can kind of choose your own path, right? You can do any of those things to meet the water adequacy requirement. What this would do is it would basically require that developers offset their demand through efficiency. And that could look a lot of different ways. It could be a 100% offset, so that developer would make that project as efficient as possible and then go off-site and retrofit elsewhere to gain savings there. Or, you know, it could be maybe the developer or the policy says you have to offset 50% through efficiency. It could go a number of different ways, but that's the concept behind that. And if you do decide you need some, you know, late night reading and you want to read that conservation plan, you'll see how impactful that policy is in there. It can save a lot of water. Again, we have yet to put that one into place, but it's on the table, so. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about how cost-effective conservation is. You're gonna be talking about these huge supply projects that cost a lot of money, and conservation's pennies on the dollar. And so basically, in summary, this plan expects to save about 4,400 acre feet in 2040. Again, an acre foot serves about 4 single households in a year or 8 multi-household units, just for context. And it outlines a 40 gallons per person per day reduction with that aggressive measure I just mentioned. Either way, regardless of which of these measures we actually do implement, they are all very cost effective. And so a great option, right, for our growing community.
I just wanted to ask, see if folks on the committee have experienced the city's conservation program, if you've seen the stuff out how they're helping residents learn more about being water wise and everything. Seems like everybody.
We have a couple of the appliances and got a few rebates and a new toilet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was really.
Jessica, I have a quick question.
Yes.
The 4,000 acre feet that you would save by 2040, would that be in math terms added to your reliable supply?
Great question. And you could think of it that way, but I wouldn't. If you're thinking about that table with the reliable
Yeah.
supply, it wouldn't move those numbers.
Okay.
It would basically just mean we're not gonna use all of that water as quickly.
Yeah, I guess it would
Right.
be in the use section.
So I guess it would move,
It would
yeah, it would
use.
move that percentage of our current
Yeah.
demand on there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so, again, we look at our gallons per capita day trend, right, to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And so what you're looking at on the screen here is, again, the last 20 years, looking at our, GPCD on the left y-axis and our population on the right. And that red arrow is pointing to the, beginning of the conservation program after the IWRP was adopted. And what you can see is that we've basically reduced GPCD by 25, which is awesome. I don't know if that's sustainable into the future. It's really, really good savings. But we're headed in the right direction, and this is going to be a metric we continue to evaluate as we move forward. All right, drought plan. So this also came out of the last hour, in addition to our conservation program, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So the city first adopted a drought management plan in 2017. We declared a drought in 21, learned some lessons, and then revised it in 2022. So the management plan has 5 main components. So a vulnerability assessment, a drought monitoring framework, a communication campaign, drought mitigation and response measures, so the things we would ask or require the community do to curtail use, and then an enforcement component as well. When we're talking about drought in Bozeman, I mean, there's dozens of definitions of drought, but we're really talking about below normal supplies that impact us directly. So like the reservoir, stream flows, snowpack. We're not really talking about like agricultural drought, soil moisture, all that stuff. So the vulnerability assessment included a bunch of different severity indicators. The graph here is just showing drought history based on one drought index, Palmer drought severity. And so basically looking back over whether it's 200, many hundreds of years, it doesn't matter. Drought has been very prevalent in our history in Southwest Montana, and it's not going to go anywhere. So we need to plan for that. It also looks at our climate projections, right? Expecting to have longer, hotter, drier summers, increased wildfire risk, high summer water demand that's associated with those hot, dry summers. And then it acknowledges that we have downstream neighbors that rely on our supplies as well, and so we need to be good stewards of those. We're fortunate to have a really great drought monitoring tool so that we can make informed decisions around drought declarations. This tool looks at various water supply data, water demand, and then some national and regional indices as well. And basically the tool kind of crunches all these numbers and spits out a drought score that is like a linear correlation to our drought stages in our plan. And so this tool really gives us the opportunity to make informed decisions about drought declarations. And if we do decide that, we need to declare a drought, we can do that immediately. Our city manager has the administrative authority to do that. If and when that happens, we would follow that with a communication campaign and also institute drought surcharges and reserve rates, which I can talk more about if you want to go there. But basically those are in place just to ensure that we have revenue stability as we require that our water demands decrease by instituting outdoor water use restrictions. And so there's 4 stages in the plan. The first one, we would likely just more strongly encourage conservation, but not put any mandates in place. There would be a surcharge associated with that of 0 to 25%. And the goal here with the stage 1 drought is to reduce water use by 10% citywide. And so each of the stages has a correlating system-wide water use reduction target. And that's really what we're going for at the end of the day. A stage 2 drought, we'd likely have additional lawn watering restrictions, would increase those surcharges with the hope of reducing use by 20% citywide. Stage 3 would likely see a lawn watering ban. Drought surcharges would jump quite a bit because we'd likely be in a lawn watering ban. So those would go from 20 to 100% with a 30% water use reduction goal. And then stage 4 would be the idea of water rationing, right? To just really ensure we have water for those essential uses. Again, we would increase those surcharges and hope to reduce use by 40% citywide. Yes.
Is there like specific metrics of when stage 2 kicks in?
There are, like in our drought plan, it outlines the different data that are in our tool. And then each of those have a different weighting factor. And then within that, they each have a different stage trigger based on like what's called a percent exceedance, which basically means how far off of normal that water supply is. So it kind of gets into the weeds pretty fast, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, could you talk just a little bit functionally about how the drought surcharge is calculated? Like how would these folks experience that on their bill?
Yeah, so we have a drought reserve and a surcharge. So the reserve is on your bill every month, no matter our condition. The idea behind that, it's a pretty nominal fee. It's like 10 cents per 100 cubic feet of use. That one is basically just meant to slowly build a drought reserve, a financial reserve, so that if we are in like a high drought declaration, we wouldn't have to institute additional fees to kind of keep the lights on with utility. The surcharge is different, so that would go into effect only when we're in a declared drought. And the surcharge is set up based on your customer class. And then if we focus in just on like single family, the different tiers of our billing structure as well. So it's a little more complicated, but the idea behind it, it is not a penalty. It's meant so that the city can be revenue neutral, meaning, for example, if you are a single family homeowner and we're in a stage 2 drought, if your water, let's say, whatever tier you're within, you know, you're using your water, if you reduce your typical use by 20%, which is our system-wide reduction goal, your bill should remain the same. So the intent is neutrality. It's not perfect, right? But that was how it was built. The caveat to that is when we get into these higher stages and have that 100 to 200% surcharge, that is intended to also help with revenue, but also send a price signal because you shouldn't be watering your lawn. And those higher surcharges go into effect for those high tiers, which represent outdoor water use. Right, so none of this is really meant to be like a penalty, it's all about revenue. Yeah. So in 2021, we declared a stage 2 drought. This is the only drought we declared since we had a plan in place. And this is just looking at our conditions in June. I don't know if any of you can remember that, like spring and summer, but it was really hot and really dry. I remember it well because of this, but so what we're looking at here on the left, you're just seeing precipitation across Montana and percent of normal. So if you can see Gallatin County, you'll see that we were at like 5 to 25% of normal precip. So way down on precipitation. And on the right, we're looking at temperature for that same time frame. And it's hard to see Gallatin County, but we were at 7 or 8 degrees above normal on temperature. So sort of the perfect storm for a drought condition. We went to our city commission in mid-July and they declared stage 2 drought. At that time, we did not have permanent watering restrictions. So right now, the norm is you can only water 3 days a week. But in 2021, we didn't have that in place. So it went from you can water to your heart's content to watering 2 days a week. So that was declared in middle of July, and we tracked our demands across that time frame. So the like red bracket on the left there is highlighting basically the middle of June to the drought declaration in the middle of July, and you can see how that's like the highest volume of use. Just for context, the numbers on the left are million gallons per day. And you can see we hit about 13 million gallons per day. That's a lot of water. We don't typically hit that much, even now, like on the hottest day in August. It's usually maybe more around 12. So hitting that in June was pretty uncanny. So that was what we were looking at. We instituted the drought declaration. You can kind of see demands drop off right after that. And then we saw that by looking at our typical peak month, or the month when people are using the most water outdoors, which is all of August. By comparing those two timeframes, we saw a 28% reduction in water use. So that exceeded our 20% goal, which is awesome. It's just all thanks to the community, right, doing their part. The one thing I'll mention for this group, since you're gonna be getting into the weeds on supply alternatives and stuff, as we talk about conservation, you know, as I said, at this time, we didn't have any other watering restrictions in place. So if we were to do this again and hit repeat with our current watering restrictions, I don't know that we would see such a big reduction because we'd be going from 3 days to 2 days. And so as we think about conservation in the context of, you know, long-term supply planning and how much like juice we can squeeze out of conservation, the more we squeeze, right, the less there's left. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about these alternatives too. But okay, I think the Jess show is over and it's next turn.
So I'm gonna go over some of the qualitative screening criteria that were used in the 2013 IWRP to evaluate the various alternatives and the screening process in general. Like Jess said, you all have a hard copy now of the 2013 IWRP. I think that'll be your homework for this, for next round or for next month, is to kind of read through that. It's a lot, but a lot of it is appendices with more detailed technical information that I encourage you to read, but you can maybe breeze through that a little quicker than like the main report content. I'm gonna go over a portion of Appendix C tonight, which is the alternatives and the screening criteria, the screening process. Next month, we'll start to go dive into those alternatives that were evaluated in the 2013 IWRP. We're gonna probably split it up over 2 meetings maybe, or maybe we'll condense it into one, I can't remember, sorry. And, we'll also have time then to talk about new ideas that the TAC has been, the Technical Advisory Committee has been coming up with, ideas that the city has also been sharing. So that's to provide some context of what these screening criteria are for. So in 2013, it was a 3-stage screening process, starting at the bottom with just basically, is it feasible legally and physically? This is level 1. Level 2 was the qualitative assessment ranking, which I'm gonna walk through in more detail with you all tonight. And then level 3 is the cost analysis, so capital costs, O&M costs, life cycle costs, and then cost per acre foot achieved or realized. So just, yeah,
Sorry, Zach. Does everybody understand kind of in the process of developing a water resource plan, the point of a multi-stage screening process for certain alternatives? Maybe you could speak just a little bit to that.
sure,
From
so
an engineering perspective.
yeah. Maybe I won't start with the engineering perspective. I think right now, anything is on the table, so we're just kind of like throwing ideas out there, like no idea is a bad idea. And so first, we just kind of wanna, the first level is of screening is intended just to say, this has a fatal flaw, we're not going to move forward with it, which we haven't gotten to yet. The second level is the qualitative, which I'm gonna walk through. And the third level, which I think, Matt, is what you're asking, is a way to evaluate the benefits and the costs of these alternatives, so that they can be a little more quantitative and come out with hopefully a recommendation that we all agree on. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, you teed it perfectly, because I was gonna say, there's kind of 2 lenses to view this through, okay? We've had the Technical Advisory Committee, and by the name, what implies they're gonna be looking at very number-oriented, quantitative values to analyze these things in a very precise way of being able to put numbers to things. The kind of the heart and soul of the PAC is to be the voice of the community, to say, yes, that is, in my community, that's gonna be socially acceptable. That's gonna be something that I know my neighbors can get behind. Or there's an alternative that scores really well, but you guys might say, I don't think I can sell that to my neighbor on the back fence. So that's the kind of the core value of bringing you together on this, is to kind of serve as that voice of the community and to test it. So we're hopeful that when we are going through this process, you're thinking of it in those terms of how you're gonna be able to explain this to Sally down the street. And if there's gonna be some unintended consequences or things that we're not thinking of on a technical, quantitative level, your value is really gonna be on the qualitative side, saying this doesn't fit our values here in Bozeman. Or, yeah, this is a little more expensive alternative, but the environmental benefits are such that I think we can really get behind this. Is that? I hope I'm explaining things. Okay.
And we'll go through those criteria that Matt's referring to, and you can weigh in tonight on if there's anything we're missing. Or shouldn't say we're missing, because we haven't established it yet, anything that the 2013 IWRP meant.
And it won't be your last time to weigh in,
So. So the qualitative screening was broken into 5 categories: technical, environmental, social, economic, and water supply. And I'll walk through each of those 5. So technical, basically, regulations. So how technically feasible or challenging is it regarding current regulations? Infrastructure compatibility, so is it compatible with what the city already has for infrastructure in terms of their distribution system and drinking water treatment plant? The drinking water treatment plant for Sourdough and Highlight is way south of the town, so taking that into account, an alternative may not be compatible with the location of that treatment plant, as an example. Redundancy, so does it provide redundancy? How redundant is it? And ability to meet the planning horizon water gap, obviously, that's kind of the whole goal of what we're trying to achieve.
Can I ask the group a quick question? Do you guys have enough of like an understanding of what like different alternatives could be for all of this to like make sense? Or do you need examples?
Good question.
And we haven't really gone over that, so I didn't wanna like jump ahead. And I did not wanna assume you've read the IWRP yet either, so.
Yeah,
I could do say.
I think
Some examples.
Yeah.
yeah, I'll go over some.
I think that's cool.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
So, Griffin can help me too here, but some stuff that comes to the top of my, so there's shares in the Highlight Reservoir. The city has shares of, a lot of the alternatives surround, increasing those shares, whether that be by purchase, of other, so there's other shareholders of the reservoir water, those at that community. There's also physical changes that could be made to the reservoir to increase potential storage rights there. Raising the dam, not all of them are that dramatic. Also, the city is working on, actually armoring, so the intake structure up there in Highlight, it's susceptible to ice damage, so armoring that, would facilitate, potential use of reservoir water in the winter, which is an alternative that the city is currently pursuing. Groundwater development is a big, alternative, a big push right now of the city. Griffin can talk a little bit about that. Sourdough drainage, the city actually has a old historic reservoir right associated with Mystic, like the historic Mystic Dam. So a lot of alternatives surrounding developing storage within Sourdough, not necessarily a traditional dam and reservoir, but alternatives surrounding that, or transferring that water right from Sourdough Canyon to another location. Alternatives surrounding that. Griffin and Jess, you guys want to bring up any other kind of major alternatives or categories of alternatives?
It's a pretty good suite of alternatives right now, Zach. Maybe as we go, think of other ones, we can bring them up and talk through them.
Sure.
Jesse, do you have?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll mention is those are good examples of kind of what we're pursuing now in some form or fashion. But as Zach said, right, there's no bad idea at this stage. And so, with like our technical committee, had discussed all sorts of different things like reusing our treated effluent for irrigation, or like even direct potable reuse, right? Reusing our treated effluent for drinking water, right? At this stage, and those aren't things we're doing right now, but we're not just limited to the things that we're already working on, right? The world is our oyster in terms of different things we could do to increase supplies. And so any of those things are all different alternatives.
Yeah, I should have started with that. There are basically three categories of alternatives developed for the 2013 IWRP. The first category was all surrounding reuse of wastewater effluent, treated wastewater effluent for non-potable uses and offsetting other uses. The second category was water supply development projects, which is more like raising the dam and Highlight, building storage in Sourdough. And then the third category was, actually I think it was just called other alternatives, but it was
Everything else.
it was more like,
Doesn't fit in this bucket.
yeah, it's more like optimizing the city's existing water supplies and conservation.
I have a question about that. Do you guys expect, or maybe the technical committee hasn't met enough, but do you expect that you'll both review alternates from the 2013 plan that were put on the table, and then also come up with new alternates. Are there such thing as new alternates still, like technology changes or other things?
Good question.
Yeah, yes, short answer, yes.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely, that's kind of what we're working through now with the TAC. And what we'll be working through with you as well over the next, tonight and next month. Is going through all the previous alternatives, if there are potentially any fatal flaws with them, or fatal flaws that you guys see or the taxis, we'll bring them up. And then the city presented some new or reworking of ideas that have already been established.
And there are some also from the 2013 IWAP that are no longer on the table because it has been completely tapped and filled out. So what was the example?
Well, Lyman Creek optimization.
You can talk a little bit about that?
You want to talk about that? Probably know a little more than me. I'm done there.
Actually, Zach probably most of it. Yeah, so up at Lyman, there's some instrumentation controls that we added up at our spring collectors within our Lyman Creek source. Lyman comes out of the ground as a spring, we collect it and then pull it in one of our reservoirs, and there's some limitations there, and so this project was completed in order to optimize and make sure that we weren't spilling or wasting water from that supply source. So we had made those infrastructure upgrades to the source. So that's basically been fully realized at this point. Zach, is there anything you want to add on that one?
No, yeah, that's exactly right.
We could squeeze more out of this. We've done the squeezing. There's no more to squeeze out of it. So that's why that alternative will not be considered. It's just not viable anymore. Or it's kind of overcome by events.
And the technical and non-technical aspects of previous alternatives will be re-evaluated too. Good to move on. Next category is environmental, so compliance with the Clean Water Act, in-stream flow maintenance, so maintaining flow in our streams was a critical part of the previous IWRP, and I presume it will continue to be a pretty high priority screening criteria. Permitting challenges and or ease of environmental impact, which is broad, carbon footprint and climate resilience. In the appendix C of the previous IWRP, there's kind of like a short little paragraph on each of these, which you guys can read if you want, if they're not self-explanatory. Third category was the social criteria. So customer service satisfaction, public health, quality of life, public support, and economic development and growth. Okay, which is reiterated in the next category, which is economic. And then economic, capital investment, O&M, eligibility for outside funding. So state and federal grants. Economy of scale impacts and ability for growth, pay for growth. So a lot of the conservation measures, not a lot, some of the conservation measures Jess was referring to would kind of be developer funded. For example, the offsetting of their water use through conservation within their development, or even beyond that, paying for mitigation in existing infrastructure and existing developments. That's an example of a measure that would be predominantly funded by growth itself. Can't think of any others right now.
Our impact fees are an example of how growth is for growth.
And a lot of the some of the CIPs, some of the alternative that their city's working on right now are funded through the impact fee fund.
Are there any federal grants left to get anymore?
So actually, do you know what the latest on that? It's changing like every day, every week, but, yes.
Okay.
But it's a fair consideration, absolutely. And the last category is water supply, so reliability and ability for the city to control that water supply. Water quality, as Jess said, we have really high, really great water quality right now from all three of our sources. So we have high standards there. Proximity to the water supply, so, Yellowstone, import is an example of proximity would be far. Safety, so is the city able to secure the water supply? Storage volume potential, we'll talk a lot about storage in our next meeting, but storage is pretty key for resilient and sustainable supply. And it impacts other water supplies, so not negatively impacting the city's water supplies or other entities' water supplies.
Would that would go to like neighbors downstream, for example?
Yes. Yeah,
Just seeing through Lyman Supply, is that pumped to the South Bozeman Water Treatment Plant or was that treated now?
so Lyman is really, really high quality is, and all it does, all that the city does is disinfect it. Chlorine, so it is gravity fed to a storage tank, storage reservoir. Closer to town, and then there's a chemical feed little building there. And then it goes into the north distribution system, north city, part of the city. There is a pumping station, booster station that can push it, raise the pressure to get it into the other part of the distribution system. And that is the city's, like they maximize the use of that, always because of its low cost of operating and high quality. Do we want to talk about screening criteria more? Are there other screening criteria that the 2013 IWRP didn't account for that you all are thinking about?
It's okay if it feels all a little bit nebulous right now. I feel like, once you get a chance to dig into the screening criteria available in the appendices to the plan, we're gonna be in a really good position, next time to talk through it. But are there questions, comments, any discussion to be had about kind of what was on the big picture of things, what was considered last time? Any glaring things that you're like, I can't believe this wasn't a part of the consideration? Anything jumping out at you guys, I guess would be the question here.
And that could either be like the main criteria, like social, or anything within that, right? It doesn't have to just be the
Yeah.
5 things.
I jumped to this one because I think the TAC, somebody from the TAC recommended, adding, like social equity, or environmental equity, to this list. That was the only recommendation that we got from the TAC on these so far.
So if there's new technology, if someone actually figures out a way to see clouds, where might, we were just talking about that earlier. Is it gonna happen or is it?
It's been figured out, Utah does it.
Okay. Where might that
Where might that,
fit in? Maybe,
Yeah.
which kind of screening criteria is new technology or the study of new technology?
I think all of these screening criteria would apply to that, and you'd be able to have input on relative ranking of that alternative for each of these criteria.
Sort of put it a different way, is think about things like cloud seeding as a bit of an alternative itself. Like, to what degree can the city invest in cloud seeding to improve the performance of watersheds in and around the Gallatin Valley? And then that would be evaluated against all these different things that we're talking about, and it would come out, you put it in that machine, you crank a bunch of levers, and it gets crunched, and it comes out the other side, and it says, how well it scores. And then you look at that, compare it to all other alternatives and say, for example, I'm not saying this would happen, but gosh, that would be a really, we could do really well if we incorporated that. But it's also super expensive. So that maybe that would get a lower score because of one of those things that would kind of knock it out of contention, right?
Okay, I'm following you now, yep.
Or the energy requirements were extremely high,
Or the people hated it.
or people hated it, yeah.
Will you get into later, like how the qualitative assessment is done?
I think we're still kind of working through that as a WAC, the Water Advisory Committee, on exactly what that looks like. I can talk about how it was done in 2013. And I wasn't there, so, but my understanding is that this first round of filtering kind of took some time, back and forth, and once a list of alternatives were kind of decided to move forward, the Water Advisory Committee scored them, literally, each of these categories, out of 0 to 3.
Yeah, so it's a numerical, you're assigning a numerical number, high, medium, low, whatever, to each alternate for each one of these
Yes,
criteria.
that's what was
Okay.
done in 2013.
Okay, so you still come up with like a numerical ranking, but it's not based on like a cost analysis or something else.
Correct, yeah, so you're right, qualitative is maybe a misleading term, because it is.
I get why you're using, I just wasn't sure if it ended up with like high or, but there is like some kind of number ranking that gets assigned to it
Yep.
based on these things, and that's how they get shuffled.
Yep.
Based on, okay.
And not only that, but similar to the drought tool, each criteria is weighted as well.
Mhm.
So one could have a higher weight than another, be a more important than another capital. That's how it was done in 2013.
Thank you.
I might, if I may add a little bit to that, so that it is possible that we run through the quantitative evaluation of all the alternatives, and we get a short list of a handful that perform really well against our screening criteria. But it comes in front of this group, and you guys say, gosh, that just doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like our community would support that. It doesn't, you know, from a developer's perspective, it might be like, gosh, that's really gonna hurt, make it very difficult to develop in the valley, or it could say that, you know, gosh, I'm worried about what that would do to water costs to people who are the most economically vulnerable in our community, right? So you guys are kind of the heart of the community, and that's the idea of this group, is to have that type of perspective being added to this, because otherwise it would be just very cynical, right? And it would be, here's the weighted score, and these are the top alternatives, and these are what we're gonna do, without a whole lot of consideration to the social elements. Now, yes, Zach's presentation tonight included social elements that would be scored against it, but the city wanted to make sure that there was a real check on those quantitative figures, so that when we go in front of commission, we can have our hearts and our heads together, united with the recommendation.
And I think we've mentioned this, but just reminding, the TAC and you all come together at a certain point, have these discussions as well.
You were gonna say something?
Yeah, my question, I think is covered on this, as far as screening criteria, but, one of my big questions overall is the legality of some of these and how you work it out, what the legal challenges are to fight some of these. Is that covered under technical, would you say, or?
So in the previous IWRP, it was initially extremely qualitative, literally like yellow, green, red, or how feasible it was legally. And then I think the WAC scored on relatively to each other how legally feasible it was or not. I think that is a major piece of this, and I don't think I have a great answer for you right now, but yeah, the legal hurdles are with the DNRC and DEQ are high.
Yeah.
That was some of the discussion earlier in the TAC meeting today was that, yeah, that's a interesting alternative that was considered in 2013. Gosh, from a regulatory perspective, it got a lot more difficult in the intervening years. So,
Or vice versa.
that's true, that's true.
I think I was optimistic today to hear some of the maybe shifts that are happening in DNRC to that are recognizing kind of the need for storage and the city staff has some great resources who have been working on this stuff his whole career and like extremely knowledgeable about all of that. And then the TAC, we have a DNRC person on the TAC who can also speak to some of those things.
Is there a sort of laundry list of like all of those ideas? That their score after them, like I'd love to see the ones that were set aside because the score was so low, or like, I'm just curious, not that we need to go through it right now or anything, but just if there's a list.
We
And it'll
will,
help us develop some.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
we will walk through, so next month we will walk through many of them, if not all of them, that were presented in 2013.
Okay.
They are also listed in the previous IWRP, in Appendix C. There's like a 2-page summary for each alternative. And then I think somewhere in this document, there should be a list with the qualitative, what I'm calling qualitative scoring. For each of them. Page, 5-6. Table 5-4. Attack qualitative criteria ranking results. Some of these might not mean much to you at this point, but hopefully, by the end of our next meeting, you'll have some more context for them.
Didn't these also get, kind of put into portfolios and then they were plotted on a graph to show kind of how they performed against certain measurements? So it was graphically pretty easy to tell how it shook out.
Yes, and that is another appendix to the IWRP. I think it's appendix B, which talks a little more about the quantitative assessment. I think the process of putting them into portfolios or into groups of alternatives was iterative and qualitative and involved the whole WAC, where the advisory committee and consulting team. Don't know if it's well prescribed, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So in the PAC process, there was a buffet of alternative, right? And then think of your buffet plate as you went and grabbed a little bit of this and a little more of that. that plate is the portfolio that was considered. And the person next in line had a different portfolio, or there was a different portfolio, so those were judged against how well they performed on like dollars per acre foot and how much yield it's gonna produce, all of those types of things. So there's a kind of there's different lenses that we'll introduce you to. So much of this is just sharing what was done in the past to get us to where we are here. And then really, it's my belief that the process of saying, and what new technology is in place is gonna be, that's gonna be a key part of the conversation. It's gonna take one meeting. We're taking a lot of time to get you guys kind of up to speed and informed on the process and what was considered last time. And the city has some new ideas that it's pursuing or it wants to pursue that they'll be presenting to the TAC and this group to say, hey, we think this has some promise. We'd like to include this and ask AE2S to perform an evaluation on it. So all this thing's gonna come together towards the end, like Zach said, when we end up marrying the PAC and the TAC, bring it all together and say, and get you to come to a consensus, hopefully, on here are the alternatives that we think the city should pursue over the next 50 years to help us maintain our water security.
I'll also point out something, just since we've been referencing appendices. There's the appendices, as you would think they'd be in the back, but don't be confused by like the front where there's like a couple really small appendices. We've learned, well, we won't do that next time, but, no, I just wanted to mention that it's also lacking page numbers, so I'm just gonna share, and I'm sorry that it is this way, the first appendix B, which is on the 12th page of this document. I know, that has, a really clear outline of everything that I just went through in screening criteria. So that's, if you wanna learn more about what that looked like last time, you could do that there, and then I'll just also mention, as we think about screening criteria and what's important and how these might be, weighted or scored in the future, that it would be what they are, but also the weighting, if we decide to weight it like last time, right? So there's a couple different kind of facets that you could, provide input on with these, so.
Move on. Next subject. Matt, do you want me to cover this or? You good to
Give me a break.
cover this?
Yeah. So we spoke a little last time about basis of planning assumptions. So does anybody want to describe for me what basis of planning assumptions are? I feel like I'm a college professor, it's exciting. Big Roman brain. So the importance of basis of planning assumptions are there are some key kind of pillars that A2S, as the firm that's going to be evaluating these things, really needs to consider. And it's really fundamental going into this process because these three things inform everything. So I think we have. So these probably look a little bit more familiar to you, right? These are so fundamental here in the Gallatin Valley and I think probably everywhere in the Mountain West. We have within 7 of the environment. The growth rate is not directly proportional to water use. There's some complexities there. But ultimately, at some point, you can't get your per capita consumption down to zero. So if you're continuing to grow as a community, which I know was something that was experienced, especially I think most profoundly during COVID, that can have a major impact going forward on things. Also, climate change impacts. From all accounts, there's going to be changes to how the climate operates here in Southwest Montana that have some interesting predictions. I think one of them was mentioned that we might actually be maybe a little bit more precipitation, but it happens at a time that it's not able necessarily to be stored as well. So you'd love it to be, your main reservoirs are, up in the mountains in the form of snow. But if you get a warm, very warm spring, and you end up with some rain on snow events, that just melts your reservoir and it flows and it's gone. It slips through your fingers, right? So there's some considerations about climate change. How much should we assume is going to be impacting water planning here? And then we spend a lot of time, with good reason, talking about water conservation, because as Jess pointed out, two things I think are key takeaways, and there might be more, so jump in if I miss one. Key takeaway number one is it is the most cost effective by far source of water. You can think of it as a source of water that that is very inexpensive to gain. The second thing about conservation is you run into diminishing returns, right? It's the squeeze. So when you go from no water restrictions, no tiered water rates, it was just the same price no matter what. That's one thing. When you start saying, oh, you can only water 2 days a week, that's quite another. But you can't then start telling people they need to water negative 2 times a week and negative 4 times a week, because you can't go below zero. So those are kind of some key considerations. There's also, so getting into the first part of this, growth rate estimates. This was, you guys all remember during COVID, like the population boom here. And there's been certainly some growing pains in the community that I've heard work out there. But there's a variety of different growth estimates. Most recent one shows growth is at 1.4%. Is that surprising to anybody?
You guys mentioned it the last time, it was super surprising.
Yeah. So these are
Low.
Yeah, it does
Like,
seem
just super.
it feels a lot,
I'm sure it's
feels a lot more than that. Yeah.
It felt like it, yeah.
Mhm. So that's the most recent one. There's a population housing forecast study that showed the baseline scenario of 2%, a little bit higher. There's an amenity driven scenario that puts it at 1.7, constrained city scenario around 1.5%. I think links to these studies are available in the information that we provided, or will be available as part of the notes.
Yes, I only have a draft of that study,
Okay.
so I don't, but yes, we'll make it available for sure, yeah.
There's other plans that I think 3% is more legitimate, so almost twice is what.
Yeah, I think it was like 4 through 21 during the higher point.
What was the highest growth rate? You recall?
I think unofficially pushing 6%,
Wow.
during COVID, but, gosh, I'm trying to remember what like that 5 and then 10-year average was. I don't know.
It was,
Can you remember that?
it was high threes, I think.
Okay.
Few data points that I'll read off the notes here, that go to the feeling that it's a lot more than 1.4% is that, Bozeman's capturing about half of Gallatin County's entire growth. So that could feel like most of the growth is happening here, and not further out in the community. Let's see. There's other scenarios here. So what was described as the amenity driven scenario says that rising household costs and greater demand for second homeowners, part-time residents, and remote workers, and that most of the workforce commutes into lower cost areas, and a higher share of housing stock is not available for full-time residents, which slows population growth but keeps demand high, right? So there's going to be that assumes a world where there's a lot of properties that are owned as second homes, which reduces the supply of housing, which supply goes down, demand goes up, prices remain high. There's also a constrained city scenario. That assumed Bozeman's growth is limited by land capacity, high cost or policy and infrastructure limits. And that Bozeman's share of countrywide growth drops from around 50% to 25%, with more population and housing being absorbed by nearby communities. So Belgrade, Four Corners, that sort of places. So in that constrained city scenario, it says, there may be slower population and housing growth within the city limits compared to the base. There's more. Here's that 4% you're looking at. These are, I think, largely city documents here. So city does studies and, this is a planning assumption for a lot of these studies. So their wastewater collection system facility plan update looked at 4%. 2023 water reclamation facilities looked at the same thing, 4% through 2040. The water conservation efficiency plan assumes 3.16 growth rate through 2040. 2020 PAC plan assumed 3% through 2040. And the sourdough water treatment plant facility, which is in progress, looks like it's going to come in assuming a 4% growth rate through 2045.
And there were a few on the previous slide after that, that study,
Few more ones.
or yeah, a couple other plans, sorry, that was a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was.
So yeah, there's a community plan, the Gallatin County growth policy. So why do we share this with you? These are all crystal balls. And you are also, you as part of the advisory committee are asked to do kind of a gut check on these crystal ball items. There's nobody can predict the future, but these are important, like I said, pillars of planning that go into these considerations, right? For what A2S is going to be thinking about. Zach, you look like you have a pregnant look on your face. Is there something?
So just reiterate kind of what you were saying is that no matter what, we're gonna be wrong. And that the city will revisit this regularly, revisit these plans regularly to make sure that if we're really wrong, things are corrected.
So we wanted to brief you all on where we kind of feel like the TAC is landing. So that can inform as your study as you go through this. It's our sense that the TAC wants to be pretty conservative with these things. It's our sense that they feel like running out of water is not an option. And while we're not nowhere close to that, it wouldn't be. They want to have water abundancy. So if there can be other forms of abundancy in the community as well. So they're looking at between a 2.5% to 3.5% growth rate recommendation, which is, just under kind of what COVID movement was like, and maybe might feel a lot closer to kind of what your lived experience is, feeling the growth and much of that happening here within city limits. They seem to be encouraging the team to plan for climate impacts that are predicted, and to be ready for those types of things. And this is not a surprise. I feel like I find it hard to find people who are not supportive of water conservation. If you lived in the Mountain West long enough, that's just part of your lifestyle. It's part of the way that we respect this this very important resource in our lives, in our communities. So there's definitely support for continuing those conservation activities and building on them too, to see what can be done that finds a balance between conserving water, but also maybe not having over the regulatory, too much of a heavy hand regulatory, right? So Jess, Griffin, Zach, anything you want to add to this? And then I'll ask, I think I'd ask the committee just to riff a little bit on if you feel like your lived experience aligns with where the tax seems to be going.
I might chime in on the consider conservation measures as alternatives. So that wording is different from another approach that we could take with the basis of planning for conservation, which would be to assume, let's say, for example, some like projection out of, okay, here's our current per gallons per capita day demand, and we're gonna assume we save X% or something, right, into the future and assume that GPCD decreases by X. That's one way to approach the basis of planning for conservation. Another alternative, which is what the TAC has leaned toward, is to, instead of doing it that way, actually look at some of the measures and, or just say like, do as much as you can for conservation, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the weeds on the measures, but they had kind of leaned toward that approach. And Zach, correct me if I'm wrong what I'm saying, but I think that's the distinction and why we call that out up there, as opposed to an artificial like decrease that we land on, kind of like a percent growth, but different, and project out, so. Does that make sense? And then I think Zach, last time you presented a little bit on the climate impacts, but I might just mention that Zach's team has, done some analyses to look at what that reliable supply that I talked about, what that would be with additional climate impacts. And so we do have some of those numbers already. And the discussion with the TAC has been, do we plan around those or not? And it seems like they're leaning toward, yes, let's plan around those to be conservative.
Anybody get rubbed the wrong way? By any of these?
The third one, the wording is a little weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain. Yeah, so it would just be, it is weird, because a lot of, like, the way we think about it, sometimes the staff and, more technical people is conservation is almost a form of new supply. And I think that's maybe what that's conveying a little bit. It isn't, it's a little different, right? But I think the distinction there is that if we go this direction, the group would actually weigh in on like conservation measures that we could do in the future, as opposed to just saying, let's assume we're gonna reduce demand by X and just lay that across the 50-year time projection. Does that make sense? It's a little more specific.
I absolutely support it. The language is a little, I don't know what it is. It's like, it's just a little.
Totally fair. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
and we could
Be more precise.
or emphasize a positive step. And it is a positive step. Somehow that consider qualifies it as like,
Mhm.
not a requirement.
Sure.
And the other two are required.
One thing I might add is when we're considering these bases of planning assumptions, as Zach mentioned, the city's normally plans to revisit these studies as we go forward, and that was a recommendation with the past IWRP. I think the more uncertainty you have, the more you can leverage that as a tool as we get further along, to recommend revisiting that earlier, or if we're feeling more confident to recommend visiting this later down the road. So that is a lever that you can adjust to as we move further along in this effort.
And these basis of planning, and Zach, you said this, like, in conversation a little bit, these basis of planning assumptions are really going to help us understand what the task is, what the volume of water we think we're gonna need is. And so they're important for that, so that when we get into looking at alternatives, we have a sense of maybe how many we need to pursue, how much we need to focus on the ones that have a higher yield and things like that, so. It has a purpose at the end of the day, but.
Are we allowed to know who's on the TAC?
Secret, sorry.
Yeah, let's see if I can do this off
Yeah,
memory.
do it.
It's a challenge. Okay, Danica Holmes, she's with DNRC. She's the Upper Missouri River Basin Planner. So she does like long-term planning stuff for the DNRC. Clayton Elliott, he works for Trout Unlimited. He's out of their Butte office, but he works, I forget his title offhand, but he works on a lot of policy related things. He's a total whiz when it comes to water rights and has been involved in some of the state stakeholder groups to revise some of the state law around water rights. Alan English works for the MBMG, so Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. He was on the last TAC, so he's the common thread through the last plan and this plan.
There's
So-
confidence in you.
He is an associate research hydrologist, but he is very well versed in all things groundwater and our basin in that regard, which is a huge help. Rebecca Kernick, she is the partnerships coordinator for Aggie, which is the Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators. So she's representing the irrigators in the valley. Holly Hill is the executive director of the Gallatin Watershed Council. And Tim Marcinko is the member of the public, like Suzanne, but he has a background in engineering and so comes in with some technical expertise, but a lot of good brains in that room.
Yeah.
We look forward to introducing you, at the point where, we have given Zach and his team time in the lab, so to speak, to, perform some analysis on, things that we're gonna be asking you in the coming months. And so you'll get to meet them. The idea was, they were, I believe it was a timing thing. They were ready to go. We had them identified a little bit earlier, and we wanted to get the process going. And so that's why they convened a little bit earlier. I think they had a couple month head start on this. So we'll get you guys all synced up and then convene the group, but we'll have a much larger breed bar available for that.
Actually, probably about the same size.
It might get sense looking at that, yeah. We might have some opportunities to bring some of that stuff if you're interested. So I believe that was the information we wanted to share with y'all this evening. And we want to leave space for conversation or questions, but also don't need to sit here if you guys feel like you understand that the homework is for next month, and we can cut you loose if there's no additional questions or comments or conversation to be had.
I just add one question, just kind of help me think through the alternatives for the next meeting. Just you mentioned, I can't remember that, I got the term for it was, but basically a change of use, getting that approved through DMRC. What is, I've heard crazy quotes on how long that process can take. What's your guys' understanding of, like, does it take a long time or what does that look like?
I think we're saying, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, okay.
Is that sounding right to you guys?
Mhm.
To like convert a water right from one purpose to another?
Yeah, that's reasonable. I think if for minor irrigation rights, that it can be faster, but typically for municipal, it's more complex, takes longer. There's higher risks associated there. So you can't hear variations in the community, but that's what we plan for.
What's the point of that exercise? What's the value of that conversion? Why is that something that we are talking about when it comes to water in Montana? For the layperson.
Yeah, I think for the purpose of this plan, you guys can chime in too, but, I think there's opportunity because we're in a closed basin, there's no new surface water rights right out there to be appropriated. So, one option we have is to convert water rights, especially as we're seeing land that was once in production, converting right into the developed area. There's water rights associated with that property. And so it's an opportunity for us to try to acquire those water rights, whether they be used to irrigate that property as well, which might be an easier change and not take 5 to 8 years, or convert, right? If there were a scenario where it would make sense to convert that to municipal, it may not because we wouldn't have infrastructure out there for that. But either way, I think we're really interested in opportunities to convert basically agricultural rights over to some sort of use that we can benefit from. You guys can add on to that.
That pretty well sums it up. To assess the impact to other water users and ensure that you're not, that any change of use in place or time isn't impacting any other. Sure. How I sum it up.
Like one thing the city, we talked about this at the TAC meeting today, but one thing the city's interested in doing is requiring that, water rights that are pertinent to a piece of property that converts from production to development, be used for irrigation on that property, right? Because that helps us keep our potable water right for that, those essential uses. So that's a policy we're interested in kind of pursuing further, for example.
It may avoid the change process.
Correct, yes. If we keep it there and use it for irrigation, just like it was, it would avoid the change process.
Is that something, an example of something that will come back to this group to pitch?
Yeah, so that's an example of alternative. Yeah, we pitched it today, we'll pitch it to you guys too, but yeah.
Everybody understand their assignments?
So I have a question about the assignment. So do we want, like more specifically, is the goal to be able to discuss the screening criteria at the next meeting in enough detail to really say like, okay, this one's the most important, heaviest weight, or I guess, yeah, could we give a little more information on that?
My goal is just so that you guys aren't coming in here cold. So when we're up here just presenting things, it's starting to rhyme in your head a little bit. We certainly aren't asking you to be experts on these things coming back, but we just think it'd be helpful if there was a little bit of bookwork pre-meeting coming in. So if you could just review it, kind of scan it, give it a little thought. That'll be, I think, really helpful to allow to have a really good conversation, so things won't be new to you. I think you'll have some gut reactions to things, and we'll want to talk about that. But the goal of, I think, the next meeting is just to get this group kind of fluent in that language and those concepts.
And again, that in the IWRP, that can be found, and this sounds silly, but like the first appendix C in the very beginning and appendix D, so it's really early on.
Feeling good? Water Montana, everybody has an opinion, it's good. Well, I think we'll close, and just thank you for your time, like, we recognize this time away from your families, and we appreciate the sacrifice that it is. We don't think that agreeable adequately compensates you for that. So hopefully our gratitude helps bridge that gap a little bit more. I'll look forward to seeing all of you in the middle of October, the 15th. So we can maybe decide over email if we want to come to costumes or not.
But we sell that.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.